The courtroom doors swung open with a sound that cut through the murmuring crowd like a blade through silk, and Marcus Kane walked in alone. 6'4", shoulders broad enough to block a doorway, wearing a leather jacket that had seen more bar fights than most men see in a lifetime. He moved with the kind of deliberate slowness that made people nervous. His boots echoed on the marble floor, each step a declaration, each footfall a promise. The gallery was packed. Every seat taken, standing room only against the back wall, where journalists jostled for position, cameras ready, pens poised over notebooks. They'd been waiting for this moment for months, ever since the indictments came down, ever since the empire started crumbling. Marcus Kane, the enforcer, the right hand to Victor Castellano, one of the most powerful business magnates in the city, maybe the entire eastern seaboard. Victor, who owned construction companies, shipping yards, half the waterfront development project that had transformed the skyline over the past decade. Victor, who is now facing federal charges for racketeering, bribery, witness tampering, and a list of financial crimes so long it would take 20 minutes just to read the charges aloud. But Victor wasn't here. Victor was in a hospital bed 300 miles away, recovering from what his lawyers called a sudden cardiac episode, what the prosecution called convenient timing, and what everyone else knew was probably theater. And so Marcus walked in alone, and the laughter started almost immediately. It began as snickers from the prosecution table, where three attorneys in immaculate suits exchanged glances and smirks. Then it spread to the gallery, a ripple of amusement that grew into open mockery. Someone in the back actually laughed out loud, a sharp bark that made others join in. Marcus Kane, the muscle, the thug, the man who'd broken fingers and noses in service of his boss, walking into federal court without a single lawyer beside him. No briefcase, no documents, no legal team flanking him like armor. Just a man in a leather jacket and jeans, looking like he'd wandered into the wrong building entirely. The judge, Honor Patricia Reeves, an austere woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled back, so tight it seemed to stretch her face, raised her gavel and brought it down twice. The sound cracked through the room, and the laughter died, but the smiles remained, plastered across faces like everyone was in on the same joke. Marcus kept walking until he reached the defense table and stood there, hands at his sides, waiting. Judge Reeves looked down at him over her reading glasses, her expression caught somewhere between confusion and irritation. She glanced at the clock on the wall, then back to Marcus, then to the empty chairs beside him. The lead prosecutor, a man named Gerald Hendricks who had made his career on high-profile corruption cases, stood up slowly, buttoning his jacket with theatrical precision. He was grinning, actually grinning like Christmas had come early and someone had wrapped up his conviction in a bow. "Your Honor," Hendricks began, his voice dripping with barely contained glee. "It appears the defense is somewhat understaffed today. Perhaps we should reschedule until Mr. Castellano's legal team can arrange proper representation for his associate." The way he said associate made it sound like an insult, like he was really saying henchman or thug or criminal. Marcus didn't react. He stood perfectly still, his face carved from stone, his eyes fixed on some point in the middle distance. But inside, his heart was hammering, not from fear, from anticipation, from the weight of what he was carrying, the secret that had burned in his chest for 6 months, the truth that would tear this courtroom apart from the inside out. Judge Reeves was about to speak when Marcus raised his hand, just slightly, a small gesture that somehow commanded attention. His voice, when it came, was deep and rough like gravel being dragged across concrete, but it carried to every corner of the courtroom. "I'm here to testify, Your Honor." For the prosecution, the room went dead silent. Not the kind of silence where people are being quiet, but the kind of silence that happens when the world stops making sense, when reality tilts sideways and everyone needs a moment to recalibrate. Hendricks's smile froze on his face. The other prosecutors looked at each other, confusion replacing their earlier confidence. In the gallery, journalists leaned forward, suddenly alert, instinct screaming that something big was happening. Marcus continued, his voice steady. "I'm here to tell the truth about Victor Castellano, about what he did, about what we all did. And I'm here to tell you who really ran the operation, who gave the orders, who took the bribes, and who killed Jonathan Torres. That last name, Jonathan Torres, hit the room like a thunderclap. 3 years ago, Jonathan Torres had been a city inspector, a municipal employee with a wife and 2 kids and a mortgage he could barely afford. He'd been investigating safety violations at one of Castellano's construction sites, had found evidence of code violations, corner cutting, payoffs to other inspectors. He'd been building a case, collecting documents, preparing to go public. Then one night his car went off a bridge into the river and Jonathan Torres drowned. Trapped in his vehicle, his body found 3 days later when the car was finally pulled from the water. The official report called it an accident, said he'd been driving too fast, probably distracted, that the bridge had inadequate guardrails. But everyone knew. Everyone suspected. No one could prove anything. Until now. Judge Reeves set down her pen very carefully, like it might explode if she moved too quickly. Mr. Kane, do you understand what you're saying? Do you have legal representation? Have you been advised of your rights? Marcus nodded slowly. I know exactly what I'm saying, Your Honor. And I know I'm probably going to prison for a very long time when this is done. But I'm done lying. I'm done covering up. I'm done being the kind of man who helps evil men do evil things because I convinced myself loyalty mattered more than what was right. Hendricks was on his feet now, his earlier smugness completely gone, replaced by something that looked almost like panic. Because this wasn't how it was supposed to go. They had their case against Castellano, strong but not airtight, built on financial records and witness testimony from lower-level employees, people who could testify to pieces of the puzzle, but never the whole picture. Marcus Kane was the whole picture. Marcus Kane was the nuclear option. And if what he was saying was true, if he was really about to expose everything, then this trial was about to become something much bigger than anyone had anticipated. Your Honor, Hendricks said, his voice tight, the prosecution requests an immediate recess to confer with this witness and verify his testimony before proceeding. But Judge Reeves shook her head. She'd been on the bench for 27 years. She knew when something real was happening. Request denied. Mr. Kane, please approach the witness stand. Bailiff, swear him in. Marcus walked to the witness stand, his boots heavy on the floor, and he could feel every eye in the courtroom on him. He could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. He raised his right hand and repeated the oath, the words feeling both weightless and impossibly heavy at the same time. Then he sat down in the chair, looked out at the packed courtroom, and began to speak. My name is Marcus Kane. I've worked for Victor Castellano for 15 years. I've done things for him that would make you sick. I've intimidated witnesses, destroyed evidence, delivered envelopes full of cash to judges and politicians and police officers. I've hurt people. I've threatened families. I've been the kind of man your mother warned you about, the kind of man who makes the world worse just by existing in it. His voice never wavered, never broke. He spoke like a man reading his own autopsy report, clinical and detached. But I never killed anyone. Not directly. That was always someone else's job. Until Jonathan Torres. He paused, letting the name hang in the air. 3 years ago, Torres was getting too close. He had documents, photographs, recordings. He was going to blow the lid off everything. Victor called me into his office late one night and told me Torres was a problem that needed to be solved. I told him we could pay him off, that everyone has a price. But Victor said no. He said Torres was self-righteous, that he couldn't be bought, that he was dangerous. And then Victor told me to make it look like an accident. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear people breathing. Marcus continued, his eyes fixed on a spot on the back wall, unable to look at the faces staring at him. I didn't do it myself. I subcontracted it, you could say. There was a guy, a specialist, someone who handled problems like Torres. I gave him the target, the timeline, the parameters. Make it look accidental. No mess, no suspicion. He did his job. He tampered with Torres's brake lines, waited for the right night, the right conditions. Rain, darkness, that bridge with the bad guardrails. It worked perfectly. Jonathan Torres died. His wife became a widow. His kids lost their father. And I collected my bonus and went back to work like nothing had happened. Someone in the gallery made a sound, somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Marcus finally looked up, his eyes sweeping across the room, and for the first time since he'd started speaking, emotion cracked through his facade. His jaw tightened. His eyes glistened. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is what happened after. The worst part is who else was involved. The worst part is that Victor Castellano wasn't the one who ordered the hit. He was just the middleman. The courtroom exploded. Not with laughter this time, but with shouts, with motion, with chaos. Reporters were on their feet, cameras flashing, voices overlapping in a cacophony of questions and exclamations. Hendricks was gesturing wildly to his team, his face red, veins standing out on his forehead. Judge Reeves was hammering her gavel over and over, shouting for order, threatening to clear the courtroom. But Marcus just sat there in the witness stand, waiting for the storm to pass, because he knew this was only the beginning. He knew the real bomb was still coming. Eventually, the room settled into a tense, fragile quiet, like everyone was holding their breath. Judge Reeves pointed at Marcus with her gavel. "Mr. Kane, you will explain that statement." "Now." Marcus nodded. "Victor Castellano is a lot of things. He's corrupt, he's ruthless, he's greedy. But he's not stupid. He never orders a hit without insurance, without someone above him signing off, someone with the power to protect him if things go wrong. And 3 years ago, the person who gave the final approval for Jonathan Torres's murder was District Attorney Mitchell Holloway. If the earlier revelation had been a thunderclap, this was a nuclear detonation. The entire courtroom seemed to convulse. A woman in the gallery screamed. Someone dropped a briefcase, and it hit the floor with a bang like a gunshot. Hendricks grabbed the edge of the prosecution table like his legs had given out. And in the back corner of the gallery, sitting in a spot most people hadn't noticed, District Attorney Mitchell Holloway, a distinguished man in his late 50s with perfect silver hair and a reputation as a crusader against corruption, stood up slowly. His face was pale. His hands were shaking. He looked like a man watching his entire world collapse in real time. Marcus's voice cut through the chaos again, harder now, more certain. Torres wasn't just investigating Castellano's construction sites. He'd found something bigger. He'd discovered that city contracts were being rigged, that millions of dollars in municipal funds were being funneled through shell companies, and that the DA's office was involved in approving the contracts. Holloway was on the take. He'd been on the take for years. And when Torres started getting close to the money trail, when he started connecting the dots, Holloway panicked. He went to Castellano and told him Torres needed to disappear. Castellano came to me, and I made it happen. Judge Reeves was staring at Holloway now, her expression unreadable but her eyes sharp as broken glass. "Mr. Holloway, you will remain seated and silent, or you will be removed from this courtroom." But Holloway wasn't sitting down. He was moving toward the aisle, trying to push past people, trying to reach the doors. 2 bailiffs moved to intercept him, grabbing his arms, and suddenly the distinguished district attorney was struggling, his composure completely shattered, shouting about false accusations and conspiracies and lies. They dragged him back to his seat and held him there while Judge Reeves called for order again, her voice like iron. Marcus watched this happen with something that might have been satisfaction flickering across his face, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. He wasn't done, not even close. "I have proof," Marcus said, and the room went silent again instantly. "For 15 years, I've been Victor's right hand. And for 15 years, I've been keeping insurance. Every conversation, every transaction, every order. I recorded it all. Audio files, video files, documents, photographs. I have recordings of Victor and Holloway discussing Torres's murder. I have bank statements showing transfers from Shell, companies to Holloway's offshore accounts. I have text messages, emails, everything. I kept it all because I knew someday this life would catch up with us, and I wanted to make sure I didn't go down alone. But then something changed." He paused, his voice dropping lower, more personal. 6 months ago, my daughter came home from college. She's studying criminal justice, wants to be a prosecutor, wants to put bad guys away. And she was so proud to tell me about this case she'd been reading about in her classes, this inspector who'd been killed 3 years ago, this hero who tried to do the right thing and paid for it with his life. Jonathan Torres. She talked about him like he was a saint, and I realized she was talking about a man I'd helped murder. The emotion in his voice now was unmistakable. His hands gripped the arms of the witness chair so hard his knuckles went white. I couldn't look at her. I couldn't be in the same room, because I knew that if she ever found out what I'd done, she'd never forgive me. She'd never look at me the same way. I'd lose her forever, and I realized that I'd already lost myself a long time ago. I'd become something that didn't deserve to exist. So I made a decision. I started copying everything. I started preparing, and I waited for the right moment. He looked directly at Hendricks now. 2 weeks ago, I reached out to the FBI. Not to your office, Mr. Hendricks, because I didn't know if there were others involved, if the corruption went deeper. I contacted a federal task force, and I gave them everything. Every file, every recording, every piece of evidence. They've been verifying it, confirming it, cross-referencing it. And they've already started making arrests. 4 city councilors were picked up yesterday. 3 judges got pre-dawn visits from agents this morning. And there's more coming. Hendricks looked like he might faint. His team was frantically whispering to each other, pulling out phones, making calls. In the gallery, journalists were typing furiously, some of them already filing stories, knowing this was the kind of bombshell that would dominate headlines for months. Marcus kept talking. Victor Castellano isn't in a hospital because of a heart attack. He's in protective custody because he knows what's coming. He knows that everyone he ever did business with is about to fall, and he knows that I'm the one who pushed over the first domino. He probably wants me dead right now. A lot of people probably want me dead, but I don't care anymore, because for the first time in 15 years, I'm telling the truth. For the first time in my life, I'm doing something that might actually matter. Judge Reeves leaned forward. Mr. Kane, you understand that by making these statements under oath, you are confessing to conspiracy to commit murder among numerous other felonies. You will face serious prison time. Marcus nodded. I know, Your Honor. I'm ready for that. I deserve that. But before I go, I want to make sure the people who deserve it more go down first. I wanted to make sure that Jonathan Torres's family knows that justice is finally coming. I wanted to make sure my daughter never has to find out what I did from a news story or a trial transcript. I wanted to tell the truth myself, face the consequences myself, and maybe, just maybe, do one decent thing before I disappear into a cell for the rest of my life. The courtroom was utterly transfixed. This wasn't just a trial anymore. This was a confession, a betrayal, a revolution, all happening in real time. Marcus looked out at the faces staring at him, and he saw everything there, shock and disgust, and fascination and horror. There's one more thing, Marcus said, and somehow, impossibly, the tension in the room ratcheted up even higher. Torres wasn't the only one. Over the years, there were others. Witnesses who disappeared, journalists who stopped investigating, activists who suddenly left town. I have information on those cases, too. Some of them were accidents. Some of them were just intimidation. But at least 3 others were murders ordered by people in power, carried out by people like me. I'm giving the FBI everything on those cases, too. This isn't just about Castellano and Holloway. This is about an entire system that's rotten from the inside out. And I'm burning it all down. He stood up then, even though Judge Reeves hadn't dismissed him, and he looked directly at the gallery, scanning the faces until he found what he was looking for. In the 3rd row, sitting quietly, dressed in black, was a woman in her early 50s with graying brown hair and tired eyes. Maria Torres, Jonathan's widow. She'd been coming to court proceedings for 3 years, sitting through hearings and motions and delays, hoping for justice that never seemed to come. Now Marcus looked right at her, and his voice cracked for the first time. Mrs. Torres, I can't undo what I did. I can't bring your husband back. I can't give your children their father. But I can tell you that the men who killed him are going to pay. Every single one of them. And I can tell you that your husband was exactly what everyone said he was. He was brave and honest, and he died because he wouldn't compromise those things. He was better than all of us. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Maria Torres sat perfectly still, her face unreadable, tears streaming down her cheeks silently. She didn't nod, didn't acknowledge him, just stared with those tired, devastated eyes. Marcus turned back to Judge Reeves. I'm ready to be taken into custody, Your Honor. I'll cooperate fully with the prosecution, with the FBI, with whoever needs my testimony. I'll plead guilty to everything. I just need to say all of this in open court first, on the record, where it couldn't be buried or sealed or negotiated away in some backroom deal. I needed everyone to hear it. Judge Reeves studied him for a long moment, her expression impossible to read. Then she nodded slowly to the bailiffs. Take Mr. Kane into custody. This court is in recess while I consult with the prosecution about how to proceed. As the bailiffs moved forward with handcuffs, Marcus held out his wrists without resistance. The cold metal clicked around his wrists, and he felt, strangely, a sense of relief so profound it almost made him dizzy. The weight he'd been carrying for 6 months, for 15 years, for his entire adult life, suddenly felt lighter. Not gone, never gone, but lighter. As they led him toward the side door that would take him to a holding cell, he glanced back one more time at the courtroom. The chaos had resumed, everyone talking at once, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions. Holloway was still being restrained by bailiffs, his perfect composure completely destroyed. Hendricks looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past hour. And in the gallery, Marcus's daughter, Riley, 21 years old with her father's dark hair and her mother's bright eyes, sat in the back row where he'd asked her to be, where he'd told her she needed to come today because he had something important to do. She was crying. She was staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite name, something between heartbreak and horror and maybe, possibly, the tiniest seed of understanding. He'd written her a letter, given it to his lawyer to deliver after today. In it, he'd explained everything, apologized for everything, told her he loved her and that he understood if she never wanted to see him again. But he'd also told her that he hoped she'd continue with her studies, that she'd become the prosecutor she wanted to be, that she'd fight for people like Jonathan Torres and against people like him, that maybe she could be the kind of person who made up for the damage he'd caused. As the door closed behind him and the noise of the courtroom cut off, Marcus Kane took a deep breath and felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Not redemption. He knew he didn't deserve that. Not forgiveness. He knew that wasn't coming. But purpose. The sense that his life, his terrible, violent, destructive life, might finally mean something more than the harm he'd caused. That maybe, just maybe, by tearing down the empire he'd helped build, by exposing the corruption he'd participated in, by sacrificing whatever years he had left, he could create space for something better to grow. And in that cold, quiet hallway, wearing handcuffs and facing decades in prison, Marcus Kane smiled. Not with happiness, but with peace. Because everyone had laughed when he walked into court alone, thinking he was just another thug, just another piece of muscle without a brain or a conscience. No one expected what he was about to reveal. No one expected that the enforcer would become the executioner. And now, the whole rotten structure was coming down.